In our reading this morning from Paul's letter to the Christians in Philippi, we hear some very familiar words. The words probably made even more familiar to any of those of you who have sung in the sacred choir. Indeed, Henry Purcell's setting of the words, "Rejoice in the Lord always," is one of my favourite anthems, which I've sung on many occasions in my youth in a church in Lincolnshire, and indeed in Lincoln Cathedral itself. But for many in these days of pandemic, we can be forgiven for thinking these words are rather hollow. What actually is there to rejoice about? The world which we have known and felt secure for most of our lives seems to be falling apart. In fact, Paul's situation when he wrote this relatively short letter was far from one of safety and comfort. He was actually in chains, in prison, yet he sought to write a letter of warning to his fellow Christians. For that, in most part, is what this letter is. His letter begins with a prayer of love and joy for its recipients, because he had been well pleased with their spiritual growth. But he was also anxious that they did not fall by the wayside and that their Christian growth should continue. The Philippians are living in a city which is fiercely loyal to Rome and, of course, was pagan. And so Paul, who is suffering in prison, is wanting to give encouragement to the Christian community to carry on with the good work. And he longs for them to enjoy progressively richer and deeper spiritual knowledge, which will mould their lives in God's pattern. Chapter 4 in particular, the one that we heard this morning, is a cry of encouragement despite the culture and difficulties of the day. Despite the fact that this letter was written to a Christian community nearly 2,000 years ago, it could have been written for us only yesterday. It seems from the first couple of verses read this morning that two Philippian women, Christian women, Euodia and Syntyche, had quarrelled. Since Paul is dealing with this in a public letter, it would appear that it was probably more than a private squabble. It suggests that they were probably two of the church's leaders. He refers to them as co-workers, and so their differences could put the whole Christian community in jeopardy. Paul urges the whole church to help them resolve their differences for the benefit of the community at large. We do not know what the disagreement was about, but Paul's next line, the "rejoice in the Lord always," suggests that he is imploring his readers to act with gentleness and compassion, so that others outside of the Christian community can see the special way, the Christian way, humans should act. In verse 4, he also reminds them and us that the Lord is always near and that we should not worry about anything. We simply need to pray about things, but in every request we make, we should also give thanks for what we have already received, like the grace. Indeed, God's gift of his only Son, our Saviour, Jesus Christ. Prayer, supplication, and thanksgiving are all intrinsically interwoven. In the last two verses of today's reading, Paul exhorts his readers to think and concentrate at all times on those things which are true, honourable, just, pure, pleasing, commendable, excellent. And we should keep on acting and living our lives with these things always at the forefront of all we think and do. Today we seem to live in a world of falsehoods. At least with the proliferation of social media, it is becoming increasingly difficult to discern truth from falsehood. We seem to be becoming increasingly polarised in our views. What is one person's truth seems to be another's fake news. The media bombards us daily with negatives, for bad news sells better than good. If we go with the flow of negatives, then that is precisely where we will end up, negatively. having nothing to rejoice about, wrapped up in our own misery and desolation. The antidote to this is quite simple. We need to continually count our blessings, to pray the prayer of thanksgiving, to remember all those good things that God has done for us. I found that helpful recently on my week's break in the Lake District. Forgetting all the bad news of the media, it was so therapeutic just to look upon those massive Cumbrian mountains which have been there for millions of years, and to feel part of God's wonderful creation. To walk upon those fells, to commune with nature, God's creation. Paul's words, whilst I was doing that, did come flooding back to me, and I found myself inwardly humming the words of Purcell's anthem. The words, those same words, with which Paul exhorts us to live our lives. Rejoice in the Lord always, and again I say rejoice. Indeed, if we think about it, we do indeed have much to rejoice about.